Hey everyone, Sombre here. This is another of my national overviews for Dominions 5 using my Warhammer mod. The version I'll be using today is 2.53, which is not yet out but will be in the next few days. It's just a minor revision. And I will be giving an overview of Nuln, one of the Empire factions. And this overview is a little different from the others in that it's really supplementary to the Altdorf video I did. I'll put a link to that in the description because a lot of the content is shared with Altdorf and I don't want to repeat myself for that. So for some things you're going to have to go and watch the Altdorf video to get those. Nuln, like Altdorf, is of course in the Middle Era. I'll just start a game so we can get to the national overview. So here is Nuln, Nuln, Bastion of the South. Nuln is the former capital and wealthiest city in the Empire, the largest and most powerful realm of men in the Old World. It is a land where magic, invention, and the courage of mortal men rub shoulders, each an essential weapon in the war against malign powers. The forces of Averland, Wissenland, Stirland, and the halflings of the Moot align behind the banner of Nuln. So there's Nuln, Bastion of the South. Now what I'll do in this video is the usual format. This isn't a guide to how to play the nation, but just kind of an introduction to what they've got, some capabilities and so on. So I'll talk about the recruitable units, I'll talk about the recruitable commanders and knightly orders for the Empire. I'll give a bit of an overview of any different mechanics, which they don't particularly have. They're not that unusual as a nation. And I'll refer to the summons, but we've already covered their summons basically in Altdorf. I'll give a view of the pretender selection that's available, and then there'll be some suggested scales perhaps at the end. So that's the order we're going to do things in. But let's start off by just a quick summary of the nation. So their race is humans with halfling allies. Their military is made up of medium and heavy infantry with extremely heavy cavalry and dedicated missile units. And they really do have dedicated missile units. That's something we'll get to in a moment. They're quite special in that sense. Their colleges of magic allow them access to all non-blood magic, so excellent diversity, same as Altdorf, but their taxes make labs more expensive. So unlike Altdorf that get labs for the normal amount of money, which is 500 gold, Nuln has to pay 700 gold, you can see there. So it's a significant extra tax, and it may influence your decisions about how many forts with labs you're going to set up, because it makes those more expensive. They have strong priests, they have a holy 3, which we'll get to in a moment, and they have standard forts. However, their master engineers can build better forts. They can actually get up to the kind of tier 3 of fort that gives you 3 command points, and that's through the master engineer, which is one of their special commanders. Their starting sites are the Imperial Arsenal, which gives you 1 fire gem per turn, 2 earth gems per turn, produces 40 resources, which is not a huge amount of resources, but can be helpful to get you started with the high resource cost things. Enables the recruitment of the Ironside and the Steam Tank units. They have the University of Nuln, which gives you 1 death gem, 1 air gem. You may be thinking, why death and air specifically for Nuln? And it's really because Nuln has a long-running connection with the Amethyst College. They've got kind of the Amethyst College of Wizards have quite a lot of influence there, and those are more their kind of colours, or their magic paths. And it enables the recruitment of a scholar. That's a capital-only researcher, very similar to the Altdorf one, but there are some slight differences I'll go over. And then they have the Temple of Sigmar, which gives them access to the Archlector of Sigmar, capital-only Holy 3, same as Altdorf, and the Flagellant. You'll remember for Altdorf, well, if you've watched the video, that the Flagellant is a recruit anywhere sacred, so potentially you can build around it, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. For Nuln, they are a capital only sacred, so even less of a build around. So we're really not looking at a nation that's going strong on the sacreds here, and you'll see that as I go through the recruits. So let's start off with those recruits. First up, we have the Moot Militia. This is not one that Altdorf has. It's unique to Nuln. Moot Militia, there's not a huge amount to say about them. They're halflings. They've got very weak kind of physical strength and toughness. None of that's on their side. They have very good magic resistance, very, very strong magic resistance of 14, but that's not typically that relevant. I suppose it might be if there was some kind of map-wide magic resistance checking spells going off or something. They have pretty bad morale, and nothing else about them is particularly stand out except for their precision, which is excellent. For 7 gold, you're getting a 13 precision unit, which is really quite strong. They don't have particularly great combat speed, but this precision and this low gold cost means they actually do have pretty good patrol strength. The cost, 7 gold for 1.2 patrol strength. A fairly typical one would be like 10 gold for 1 patrol strength, so they're a bit better than that. Weapons-wise, we've got not very good armor. They come with a basic short bow. The short bow adds a third of the wielder's strength, and of course they have about 2/3 the strength of a human being. They've got 6 instead of 10. So we do have decreased damage on the short bow, but if you've got flaming arrows up, that's basically the use case for Moot Militia. Flaming arrows plus Moot Militia is much like the Machaca strategy of the Pygmy Archers being used with flaming arrows, and flaming arrows is definitely something you can fairly easily cast with Nuln. So that's the use case of the Moot Militia. That's a bit of patrolling. Maybe you would want to get some Moot Militia if you were up against enemies with low protection or glamour or something where you just want to pelt them with lots of missile attacks. The Flagellant we've already seen. It's exactly the same as the Altdorf one. Same for the Archer. It's not a state troop, so it doesn't have the increased marching ability. The State Spearman is a little different from the Altdorf Spearman in that instead of having a spear, he gets access to the long spear, which basically is the same thing but with -1 defense and length 4. Length 4 does mean that it can repel those length 3 weapons like polearms and other spears, and that can actually be pretty good. That these do okay in spearman fights. If they're fighting other spearmen, that extra repel is really nice, and the fact they can't be repelled. They also have, because spearmen are more popular in the southern provinces because of the influence of places like Tyler and the border princes, they're more properly trained up as state troops. They don't have the heavier armor, the plate cuirass of the state troop, but they do have this superior map move, better morale, and so on. So they are a little bit more expensive than the spearmen you get for Altdorf, but they're closer to being true troops than like militia. We get state halberdiers, much the same as Altdorf. Free infantrymen, much the same. State swordsmen, much the same. They have different graphics, as you can see. I've got the livery of the different southern provinces rather than the ones that were in Altdorf's territory. The crossbowmen, I believe, are yes. So the state crossbowmen of Nuln benefit from the expertise of the marksman and are better shots than those of Altdorf and Middenheim. So we do get a free extra little point of precision here. It's just 1 point of precision, but it does mean that their crossbow are just in general slightly better. Again, it's 10 gold and not very many resources for okay protection and being able to field a crossbow. So actually pretty good units. So now we're moving on to the real key unique troop that Nuln has. This is a capital-only recruit from the Imperial Arsenal, the Ironside. So conceptually, what the Ironsides are is basically a hybrid missile and close combat infantry. They have really good armor. They've got better than the typical state armor. They usually have a plate cuirass and then iron cap, I believe. These are plate hauberk and half helmet, and they come up with pretty good protection. Makes them pretty resistant to missile fire and tough in melee. They have a really good weapon in the form of the halberd. We've talked before about how good halberds are. And these are, it's hard hitting, and half the time it does pierce, which reduces armor by 20%. So they really can mess stuff up, even things with quite high protection. And then they also have a crossbow, so they're not sacrificing anything. They're able to switch back and forth between the halberd and crossbow without any problems. This is very unusual in Dominions. Typically, something with a crossbow would be carrying like a dagger or a short sword, but there's some units in Man, I believe, that have a combination of shields and crossbows and swords and things like that. So they're a little bit like those units. They have better than normal stats. They've got 12 morale, base 11 attack skill, base 11 defense skills. So they're a bit better trained. They're more like the swordsman. They've got the decent starting map move, although they do have a bigger armor penalty than most state troops. So they have okay map move, considering. Their precision is at 12 because they are well-trained marksmen, so you're going to get pretty accurate crossbow fire out of these guys. And they only cost 14 gold. Extra point of hit points there as well. No extra point of strength, but increased stats, but they do cost 4 more gold than a typical crossbowman, and they do cost more resources, obviously, because you're paying for the armor. But hybrid infantry like this is really good in Dominions because they can keep firing their crossbows. The enemy will reach them, and then when they reach them, they're basically even better in melee than they are as ranged units. So they'll start swinging around in melee, but also the back ranks of Ironsides will typically keep firing. So the enemy can end up being hit by the halberds by the front rank, and then the back ranks will also be pelting them with very accurate crossbow shots because it's at short range. So they can actually kill high protection things that don't have a huge amount of hit points pretty easily. That tends to be what they're very good at. And there are quite a few of those things in the Warhammer mod, so the Ironside is a good counter to those. Great swords are much the same as the Altdorf ones. We've already talked about those in the Altdorf video. And then we have another specialized missile unit, the Marksman. So Marksmen cost quite a few recruitment points, as you can see, 24. This is because they required a huge amount of training, basically, and certification from the Imperial Arsenal. But they're not capital only. You can recruit them anywhere, and they don't cost that many resource points. contrast them with the crossbow, it's about the same resources, but significantly more, triple the recruitment points, basically. So the marksman's big difference from the crossbowman is he's got a little bit better precision, but his real big difference is that he's using an arbalest. Now, the arbalest is a little bit of a maligned weapon in Dominions. People use them with Middle Era Ulm, and because they don't fire as quickly as the crossbow, and because a lot of the time the amount of extra damage they do is overkill, they're kind of not very popular. Plus, when you're playing as Middle Era Ulm, your own troops tend to be the ones with really high protection, not the enemy. So the Arbalest's kind of specialized at killing your own guys when it misses, and maybe not such a good idea as a crossbow against the enemy. However, having access to 15 armor-piercing damage at range with good precision can be very good. Certain types of troop that don't have shields, and maybe they rely on their protection and they don't have that many hit points, they can be killed by the marksman, and you can end up trading very efficiently. A good example of this would be Chosen Chaos Warriors. Very high protection. The Slaanesh ones have shields, but the Nurgle and Khorne ones do not have shields. Anything that's using two-handed weapons and is fairly expensive, things like that. Even kind of expensive cavalry that doesn't have the best shield, maybe just a basic shield, the marksman can mess them up. At very long range, it's kind of paradoxical. You would think you'd want to stay at long range with units like the marksman, but actually you want to get relatively close to the enemy. You want to kind of pin them and have the marksman firing at them from a shorter distance, because in Dominions your precision massively increases the closer the target is. And if you can get these guys firing turn after turn, if they can get a couple of rounds off, because these only fire every 3 rounds, but if you can get a couple of shots off at close range, you can do some terrific damage. You can even kill kind of kitted out thugs and things if they don't have particularly good shields, or they don't have air shields, things like that. So the marksman, if you've got the recruitment points, which you may well do if you're taking order and growth, things like that, if you've got good population, definitely worth cranking out units of these to go along with crossbowmen. Perhaps I wouldn't entirely replace crossbowmen with them, but yeah, they go well with them. What they don't synergize terribly well with is flaming arrows. So you can see already we've talked about we've got superior crossbows, we've got the Ironsides, we've got the marksman, and we've got the militia. So we've got things that benefit a lot from flaming arrows, things that benefit significantly less, things that are good against low protection targets, things that are good against high protection targets. We have another specialized ranged weapon here, the Outrider. So in the latest version, I've actually slightly decreased their gold cost and made them, I think, pretty aggressively costed for what it is. They come with decent protection. They're not particularly great melee combatants. They only have a short sword. There's no shield there, so their damage output is not fantastic. Their stats for combat are not amazing. They've got the kind of base attack skill and things. They do have good map move, and they do come with a patrol bonus of 1. So we're talking about 25 gold, and you end up with a patrol strength of 2.6. Not as good at patrolling overall as the Moot Militia. The Moot Militia definitely beat them for patrol strength for gold cost, but they're more useful troops, I would say. You can use them to kind of attack the flanks as light cavalry, but that's not really the best use of them. They just don't have the damage output for that. Where they are really strong is if you can get within their relatively short range of their repeater crossbows and just shoot the enemy up. So they may be quite good at fire archers or fire cavalry. If you can tie the enemy in place, get the outriders near to them, and fire the repeater crossbow at them, you will note that the repeater crossbow, and this is has the same name as the Dark Elf one, but it actually fires twice as fast. So every turn, we're talking about 2 crossbow bolts coming out. Now, they're not as powerful as a regular crossbow bolt. If we look at the damage overall, we've got the repeater crossbow, 10 piercing, armor-piercing damage, and then the crossbow is 11 piercing, armor-piercing damage. So not quite as strong as the crossbow, but because the crossbow only fires 1 shot every 2 rounds, these fire 2 shots every round, we've got 4 times the output coming out as the regular crossbow, and they're not that much weaker. They do benefit a bit from a strength buff, but it's not that exciting, I would say, because we're only adding 1/3 of strength. But if you can get close to the enemy, and you can also see that the precision is less good on these guys than on the crossbows. They come base precision 11. The repeater crossbow has 0 bonus, whereas if we look at the crossbowman over here, we've got 11 base precision, and then the crossbow gives them 2 precision. So they're definitely less accurate, and then the fact that they've got lower range also means that they're less accurate because they don't get the you're at very short range for your weapon bonus that you would often get. They can really pelt stuff. If your enemy didn't bring shields, air shields, or some kind of counter to it, you can use the Outriders to absolutely pelt them. They do cost quite a lot of recruitment points and resources, significantly more than their gold cost. That's something to keep an eye on, and it will be a limit to how many you can use, but I would say the Outriders definitely worth using. Order Knights we've already talked about. Demigryph Order Knights, same. It's once again recruitment limited to 1 per month, just like Altdorf. And then we have our 2 special war machines. The first of them is the War Wagon. And it's best to think of the War Wagon as being like a big, tough chariot, which is very expensive, which is going to go and trample the enemy. But before it tramples the enemy, you leave it with like a default orders or to fire at the enemy, and it will go through these different range brackets, and it will put out a large amount of missile fire before it gets there. So if you don't give the War Wagon any orders, it just rolls towards the enemy, gets within range of a target where it's within range 40, and it'll put out these attacks here. So we're talking about higher than crossbow damage. We've got 13 damage as opposed to 11 damage. It's armor piercing, it's piercing, so it's good against high protection. But we're talking about 4 attacks coming out. Only a single ammunition, so it's going to make 4 crossbow shots basically first. And then the next round, pretty much, it's going to make 4 more shots at closer range, and then it's going to move in even more to an even closer range, and it's going to make another 4 shots. So in total, we've got 12 crossbow bolts that are going to come out of these, and they'll come out at kind of variable stages as it moves towards the enemy. Once it gets there, it is a high protection, relatively okay combat speed for a chariot, but mostly high protection, and the ability to repel is there as well. It has crew polearms, which are length 4. That's enough to be repelling most things in the game. And they've got okay attack, so it can repel things that are attacking it, and it comes with the built-in Unsurroundable, which is higher than the Unsurroundable on normal chariots. I believe they have Unsurroundable 1, this is Unsurroundable 3. What that means is that the first 3 things that attack it ignores the harassment penalty for those attacks. It's also got complete affliction resistance and recuperation, which is because it was weird if it was like lost an arm on a war wagon full of crew. Now we've got some details down here. At 40 hit points remaining, the War Wagon switches to a damaged form with 1 horse slain. So once you've taken 10 damage, it switches form. And then at 30 hit points remaining, it loses that horse also and becomes immobile. Either will return the original 2-horse form at the end of the turn. And your recruitment is limited to 2 per month. And you can see at the top here that we've got very high resource cost, 130, and 150 is high gold cost. But we're talking about a pretty nasty chariot here. Previous versions of this nation, you could only recruit 1 per turn. I've upped that to 2 so that no one can field these in larger numbers. And there's a preview. Hold on a moment, that's my auto feeder going off in the background. Sorry about that. That was an automatic feeder feeding my rabbits there and calling them over. But we've got this preview site here, Nuln War Machine Other Forms. And this will show you what the damaged War Wagon and immobilized War Wagon actually look like. So the damaged War Wagon has significantly reduced missile weapons here, so you're down to just 1 of those. Your combat speed is considerably reduced, so you're not as good at trampling anymore, and you have your typical crew polearms just the same. We've got 3 attacks that it can put out, but it can still trample, so it's not really going to be using those. It is size 5, so pretty great at trampling. And then the immobilized War Wagon, it no longer tramples because it doesn't move anymore, basically. It just kind of sits there. Missile weapons, you get an actual increase of ammunition here, so they just sit inside their kind of fort and start shooting, and you've got 3 attacks coming out each time from those. And then the cruise polearms have been separated out. So the fact that these are separated out actually means that they now have more chances to repel. Previously they had 1 chance to repel, even though they had 3 attacks. That's just how Dominions works. Now they have 3 chances to repel, and you can see that these different weapons do different things. We've got a hook halberd that hits very hard. We've got a ball and chain, which has 2 attacks and attacks versus shield. It's like a big 2-handed flail, basically. And we've got a man catcher, and this is armor piercing damage, but can be negated by large or strong beings. So it's kind of grabbing hold of them and like breaking their neck is kind of what's going on there. But very high armor piercing damage, very high piercing or slashing damage, and then multiple attacks that have the ability to, help wrap around shield. So this is the crew weapons going off there. It gets a slight increase in protection. But basically what this means is that the War Wagon, as it takes damage, slows down, stops trampling, and sits there and defends itself. But they're pretty tough. It's surprising how much it takes to take out a War Wagon. They start off with pretty good protection of 18, and then the protection actually goes up slightly as they get more attacks and the horses get killed off. The horses will always come back, so your war wagon will always be repaired for the next turn, but if you have multiple battles in a turn, it can be a problem because it doesn't repair that quickly. Steam Tank is a similar thing. This is only one per month, and this is a real highlight of the nation. Kind of a weird thing and difficult for the opponent to counter. It's very expensive, 275 gold. Now, I may have to review this gold cost a bit, but you will see why it's so expensive as we look at it. It costs a huge amount of resources, 218, very, very high resource cost. Almost double, basically, a war wagon. It's like two war wagons almost in cost. It has 80 hit points, it's size 6, and it has 24 protection. So very, very, very tough. It also has OK magic resistance, OK morale. Now, what does the Steam Tank do? Well, it rolls into the enemy slowly and it tramples them. It tramples them and it absorbs attacks, and those attacks have to get past very high protection, slash resistance, and pierce resistance. So ideally, they want to be hitting it with blunt weapons, and blunt weapons are not that common in Dominions. So it's very hard for the enemy to kill the Steam Tank unless they have very high damage output. It also has fire resistance, cold resistance, and poison immunity because they can just shut the hatch and ignore the poison. It also comes with a built-in fire shield, so this is good against stuff like long dead, things like that. It's a low damage fire shield because it just represents the heat of the boiler destroying things around it and kind of steam shooting out of it. It comes with a very nice siege bonus, but you won't really be recruiting it for that because it's so expensive. It's got unsurroundable 2, but again, it's not going to rely on its defense, so that doesn't matter very much. It's completely immune to afflictions, basically, so that's nice. Again, it's the same as the war wagon. The attacks that it has are not terribly relevant. It's melee attacks. Because of its large size, it's basically always going to be trampling things, but if it can't trample something, it will crush it, which is very high damage and armor piercing and untyped, so there's no physical resistances against that, so it's sometimes useful that it can just ram into something that's another size 6 and crush it. It also has a Jet of Steam attack. The Jet of Steam attack, one of the nice things about this is that it can be used to repel the enemy. That's its purpose. It has very high attack bonus, as you can see, and very high length. So the Jet of Steam is another thing like the Fire Shield that's keeping the Steam Tank from being overwhelmed and killed. And that actually does benefit, I believe, from Unsurroundable, because repels are also kind of harassed down by multiple attacks per turn. And it also has a missile weapon in the form of the steam-powered cannon. So I have not put gunpowder weapons at all in my mod. I don't think that they work properly in Dominions, so I do not put them in the mod. But I have put a steam-powered cannon in. It fires a kind of boulder out in a short arc. It's not very long range, but you can see it is high damage, 20, and that is 20 armor piercing damage, and it is area of effect 1, so the enemy's shields, their ability to dodge, anything like that does not matter. And it's pretty accurate. It still misses a lot because that's just the nature of short-ranged missile weapons. But the fact that you can just roll up to something that is otherwise extremely tough and maybe just blast it with a steam-powered cannon is quite a cool option. Much like the War Wagon, this has a damaged form. It only has the 1 instead of 2, and it happens when it's at half health. If it's taken 40 of its hit points in damage, it's all the way down to 40 hit points or lower. It switches to its immobile venting form, but then that, of course, will return to the original form at the end of the turn. So if we go to the preview site, we can see the venting steam tank. You can see that it no longer moves, so it's not trampling anyone anymore, and instead it sits still and it uses vent steam attacks, which is fire armor piercing, and has a very big area of effect. So it's just blasting steam all over the place, which can be very good against swarms of weaker enemies. And 11 armor piercing damage is not bad, but if they've got fire resistance, they'll get through it. It has the same fire shield and so on as before. It can still repel using the vent steam. And it also has, Jet of Steam is the repelling attack. Vent Steam is the one which is doing a big area effect attack. And it doesn't have its gun anymore. So once it's damaged, it just sits there, defends itself, and does these big, medium damage armor piercing area of effect attacks that can kill lots of troops. And it retains its resistances and protection and so on. So when do you use the steam tank? Use it against things that it can trample. Use it against things that don't hit hard enough to take it out. Use it if the enemy hasn't brought blunt weapons. You do have to worry about the enemy hitting it with single target nasty spells and things like that. And it can't get tired out, but it can get kind of chipped down and beaten up. And it is obviously expensive, so you have to be kind of careful with the way you script them. They're slightly difficult to use, but I encourage you to give them a try because obviously something with these built-in resistances and such high protection and good hit points, fire shield, the ability to repel and so on, you'll quickly see just how incredibly difficult it is for the enemy to kill. You're just not going to be able to field that many of them. So that's it for the troops. Let's talk about the commanders. To start off, we've got the basic scout. We've talked about them. We've talked about state captains before. We've talked about generals before. These are basically all the same as the Altdorf ones. The Master Engineer is new, however. So for 70 gold and some resources, this is quite high considering he's not like a heavily armored guy, you get the Master Engineer. Now, he's got a few different things going for him, but we'll start off with the single most important things, which is these 3 abilities here. Siege bonus 25. So for 70 gold, we're ending up with a massive siege strength. He's also got castle defense, so he's good, much like the Middle Era Ulm kind of siege engineers. This guy is just a good guy to have in sieges. He also only costs a single recruitment point, so you could have 2 of those per turn, except for the fact that because he's a Mason, you could have upgraded your capital, you could have upgraded any of your forts, in fact, to be 3 command points per turn, which means you can have more mages, because you're getting a 50% extra command point. You can have like a mage and a master engineer every turn. You can do a lot of things. It's really strong being able to upgrade your castle. It also makes them harder for the enemy to take, and you get a slight bonus in gold resources, things like that, from the administration bonus. What does he actually do on the battlefield? Because you do want to bring him to the battlefield. He's not just there for sieging and repairing things and masoning things. That's his main purpose, but it's not the only thing that he does. On the battlefield, he automatically casts aim once on the battle start. So if you put a bunch of these guys dotted around, they will cast aim. They may cast it on themselves. They may cast it on a unit that's nearby to them. Aim is an area effect 1 precision buff. It's the basic spell that does that. That's in air magic. You only get 1 of those, so it's not massively important, but you can put them near things where you want to increase their precision, like marksman. You could even use it on like the steam tank or a war wagon if you put them next to that. And they come with a ranged weapon they can use, the experimental arbalest. So the experimental arbalest is pretty cool. It attacks every round. It's much faster than a normal arbalest. It does a huge amount of damage, a total of 19 armor piercing damage. It is very accurate. He has base precision 13, and then the experimental arbalest gives him another 8. It has 10 ammunition, so you can keep firing considerably for most of the game. So if you tell him to shoot at something, at some point he's going to hit it, and he's going to hit it really hard. When he does hit it, also, or even if he misses, you get an area effect 1 explosion, armor-piercing explosion. So this is actually a pretty great weapon. If you get a bunch of these guys firing away, they can really do some damage, and they're not that likely to end up in melee and get killed. Basically, you want to keep these at the back picking away and then have them kind of run away if they get in trouble, or you want to keep them safe with bodyguards and things like that. But Master Engineers, yeah, pretty nasty, surprisingly. I would definitely say that the Master Engineer is like a big feature of the nation, just because, if nothing else, it allows you to get really good sieging ability, really good cast defense ability, and to mason up your castles, get 3 command points, which is really strong. We'll come back to the Knightly Order tributes, the same as we did for Altdorf. Let's move through the other commanders. So Initiate of Sigmar, Warrior of Sigmar, Warrior Priest. These are the same as the Altdorf ones, and then the mages are the same, except the costs are slightly different. You get Amethyst Wizards a bit cheaper because they're favoured in Nuln. You get Gold Wizards a bit cheaper because they're favoured in Nuln. And some of the other ones are a bit more expensive, like the Bright Wizard's more expensive. And then a couple of your mages are actually, instead of being 2 command points, like the Gold Wizard, or like they were in Altdorf, the Amber Wizard is 4 recruitment points. They're less popular in Nuln. Nuln is less kind of surrounded by wilds. It's more civilized. The Amber Wizards are less common there. They're a bit more rare. So you have to pay double the recruitment points to get Amber Wizards. So you will not have as many Amber Wizards, that's for sure. Same with the Jade Wizards. But then everything else, recruitment points is 2. They're just slightly expensive, like Grey Wizards, things like that. So the Wizards otherwise are the same. Though do remember that your labs cost 700 gold. Now, you also have a Scholar, that's the same as Altdorf, but I believe the Nuln Scholar is slightly better, and he also comes with an unusual thing. He's got a bit more siege and cast defense bonus. I think he's slightly better overall. He's got the same issue that he is a philosopher, so he'd like to have sloth scales, but obviously this nation, even more than Altdorf, really wants you to go for production scale, so it's very unlikely you're able to use that. But interestingly, the Scholars of Nuln have a 5% chance of getting you Blood 1, because there have been some problems in the University of Nuln with the taint of chaos or heresy or blood magic. So if you recruit a few of these, you may get a Blood 1, and that can be nice to breaking into Blood. Now, obviously, you can break into Blood anyway, potentially by finding Blood Indies, or just forcing the issue by blood hunting with scouts until you can empower one up to Blood 1. But if you do recruit some Scholars, it can be a bonus to get Blood 1. Art Sector of Sigmar is the same. So let's quickly talk about the Knightly Orders. You've got 5 Knightly Orders: Sacred Scythes, Gold Lion, Black Bear, Knights. Sorry, my headset cut out there. I'll list those again. So it was Sacred Scythe, Gold Lion, Black Bear, Knights in Common, and Sigmar's Blood. Sigmar's Blood are your sacreds. The other ones, much the same as Altdorf ones. Let's just go through them quickly. So Sacred Scythes, 700 gold, you get 12 Knights and the Grandmaster. Let's take a look at them. So Sacred Scythes, the Grandmaster, kind of an interesting guy. He has ethereal, kind of a weird, almost vampiric character. He has the typical good stats and things and high patrol bonus, which is, I believe, a Sacred Scythe thing. Comes with the Silver Scythe weapon that has Smite Undead built into it, which is pretty nice. Pretty good stats and everything. His main thing is that he's ethereal, which is kind of interesting, but doesn't have quite as many slots as you would typically have. No body slot because he's got special armor that he can't replace. That's to do with his cloak, actually. The Sacred Scythe Knights themselves are not sacred, despite their name, but they do come with Silver Scythes, which are magic weapons, which is quite exciting, and they have Smite Undead, which can be useful against Undead. It's just an extra bit of damage against any Undead target they hit. So these guys are good against Vampiria and Nagashizar, which field their things, and they're also good against demons because they do magic damage. Anything that has invulnerability suffers from these, but particularly they're good at killing those ethereal undead, like the Cairn Wraith, stuff like that. The Gold Lion is 750 gold, and you get 15 knights. So, decent number of those. Let's go to those. Grandmaster of the Gold Lion comes with a lion that helps him fight, which is kind of cool, but other than that, he's nothing particularly special. They do have Wasteland Survival. The Gold Lion Knight, Wasteland Survival. They use falchions rather than broadswords, which is, I think, really a downgrade. It's a slight increase to damage, but they don't get the extra stats and things. But they're basically like an Order Knight, maybe slightly better. The Black Bear, you get 15 Knights for 800 gold and the Grandmaster, so slightly more expensive than the Gold Lion. The Grandmaster of the Black Bear is kind of cool. He comes with Animal Ore, and he's got the Tyrant Flail, which is this massive, very destructive flail that has 2 attacks per turn. So he can absolutely batter stuff with that, but he doesn't have a lance. And the Black Bear in general, and the Grandmaster in particular, have much higher hit points and strength than normal. They're like really big guys. So let's look at the Black Bear. Higher strength than normal, which is great for all of your broadsword and lance attacks to be doing extra damage, and then more hit points, also pretty good. So the Black Bear really kind of dependable, like heavy version of the Order Knight. Then we've got the Knights in Carmine. So they are 800 gold, and you get 14 of them, so they're more expensive yet again than the Black Bear. The Grandmaster of the Knights in Carmine comes with a Sword of Swiftness and a Main Gosha Parrying, which makes him an absolute combat terror because we get 2 attacks out of this with a magic weapon. We get another magic weapon that gives you lots of extra defense. So he has really good kind of duelist type stats, as well as really good protection things. So you can definitely do some kind of thugging with the Grandmaster of the Knights in Carmine, I would say. And the Knights in Carmine themselves, they have ambidextrous and they have 2 falchions, so they have 3 attacks. They have this particular unusual ambidextrous way of fighting, but they don't have lances, so they can struggle a bit more against things with high protection, but their stats are really good. They have like extra attack skill and defense skill over most knights, but no shield, of course. And then finally we have the tribute to Sigmar's Blood. So 800 gold, you get way fewer knights here. You get 8 instead of like 14 or 15, but they are of course sacred. So let's take a look at them. The Knight of Sigmar's Blood, well, let's start with the Grandmaster actually. Grandmaster of Sigmar's Blood has got Halt Heretic and Inquisitor, and he is a priest level 1, so he can bless his own guys, which is nice. He comes with an enchanted hammer, which is cool. And he's generally just pretty tough and useful. I would mostly use him as, he can maybe do a bit of thugging if you've got the right bless, but you're not very likely to be going in for a strong bless with these guys, obviously, because of the flagellants not being great and being capital only. The Knight of Sigmar's Blood, they use hammers, which I would say overall less good than broadswords, but they do piercing damage, which can be used against things with high protection. They have lances, they have a patrol bonus, which is not terribly important, but it can be useful sometimes, and they are of course sacred. That's the main thing. We've got high protection, heavy cavalry sacreds, which can be quite nice. But I wouldn't necessarily recommend doing a bless based around these, because again, your main sacred is the flagellant, which is capital only, and is not particularly good sacred. And these are, there's quite a limit on how many of the Tribute of Sigmar's Blood you can have, and they end up quite expensive because obviously 800 gold, you get 8 of them plus the Grandmaster. So if you ignore the Grandmaster, you're paying 100 gold for each of them, which is expensive for what they are. So that's the knightly orders. Let's talk about heroes and multi-heroes. So as with all Warhammer nations, your multi-heroes are based on your luck scale. Here we have a smaller selection than we had for Altdorf, and the noble is not on a griffin, he's on a Pegasus, so he's slightly less good, but we've got our potential thug here. He's flying, he's got a good map move, he comes with an enchanted sword, which is nice, he comes with the weightless kite shield, which is nice, so some good starting off equipment, but basically flying, decent stats. He can do a bit of thugging. Amethyst Wizard Lord, we're quite familiar with by this point, and Gold Wizard Lord, again, check out the Altdorf video for information on those, but they're nice to have as multi-heroes, obviously. I would say particularly the Gold Wizard Lord's really good to get as a multi-hero, if for forging, if nothing else. And then your luck independent heroes, we have 3 of them. First, we have the Hand of Justice, Theodore Bruckner, from the Tamarkan special book. He's on a gigantic demigryph, and he comes with some cool features. So he's got great stats, great hit points. He fights, I believe he doesn't separate from his mount when he dies. They fight on together. Yes, because when he dies, he actually explodes. Yeah, he's got a Baleflame Amulet, which protects from hostile magic, and should he fall in battle, explodes into a fireball. So he's kind of got like that extra parting gift, let's put it that way. But very high hit points. You can throw regen on him potentially. That could be really good. Very, very high protection because of all the armor on his very tough mount and the heavy army that he is wearing. Just generally great stats, very high strength, he hits very hard. He's got the Storm Lance, which is a really good lance, which does an extra effect of shocking, which is obviously armor negating attack. So he can blast people with the Storm Lance, but he only gets to use it once, of course. It's like a magical special version of a lance. Then we have Reaper, which is his demigryph, has 2 talent attacks. They are armor piercing, they are pretty accurate, and they are very high damage indeed. We've got 19 armor piercing damage coming out twice per round from Reaper, so he can really tear stuff up. And then he himself carries a really strong magical sword called Liar's Bane, so very high damage, good stats on it. So we end up very high damage output, very high protection, lots of hit points, definitely thug material. The Supreme Patriarch of the Colleges of Magic is obviously, as you would expect, a fantastic mage. He's basically like a Gold Wizard Lord, but kind of turned up to 11. So he comes with a Forge bonus like the others. He comes with these resistances, although they're higher than with others. And he comes with Gem Generator. He generates, I believe, does it say here? Generate magic gems. I think he generates 1 fire and 1 earth. Per round, but I should let me check that just a second. Yes, I checked, and he generates 1 fire and 1 earth per round, and those aren't temporary gems; those are permanent gems. So he's a gem generator, if nothing else. But there certainly is a lot else about him. He flies, obviously, which is fantastic. Being on his Pegasus, he's got decent hit points. His stats, you're not going to turn him into a thug, but he's got okay stats for kind of keeping himself alive. And those resistances help a lot with that, having all of these great resistances. Earth Magic level 4. Fantastic, very welcome. Water 2, very useful for keeping himself alive and for some various buffs. Air Magic level 1, again, that is useful just for kind of keeping him alive, maybe throw up an air shield. And then Fire Magic level 3, obviously he is a very strong battlefield caster, and he can also forge a wide variety of things with his cross paths and his forge discount. He also comes with the Mask of Gold. This doesn't do anything itself, but it's built into his statistics that it gives him kind of resistances to things. It's the same as his Cloak of Molten Metal there, which acts as a shield, but also gives him some extra resistances and things. And then he carries the Staff of Volans, which again boosts his magical abilities, and that's built into his stat line. He also has the automatically cast Mirror Image on battle start. I believe that's from the Cloak of Molten Metal. So yeah, he gets a mirror image that can be useful in case something does get next to him, or in an assassination or something like that. But he generally shouldn't be fighting. He should be using his excellent magical abilities outside of battle to do rituals, to do forging, or in battle to do big spells. Then finally we have the Elect Count of Averland, Marius Lightdorf the Mad, a man with a great sense of fashion, very little sense of rationality, but excellent fighting abilities. So pretty great stats, very high attack and defense skill obviously built in here. He is insane, so 10% of the time, 1 in 10 chance each turn of him just doing something mad and not what you want him to do. But other than that, he is a good leader. He's like a souped up version of a Grandmaster or a General of the Empire. He comes with a Rune Fang and a short sword. He dual wields those. You cannot replace them. He has to be using those. The Rune Fang, as we talked about before, good stats, armor piercing, magical weapon, very nice. He's got good protection. He's got okay, magic resistance and things. He also makes you money because he's a staunch supporter of the Empire, and he is extremely extravagant and wild with his money. So he just gives you 50 gold per turn. So you definitely want to keep Marius Lightdorf alive, but I would suggest doing a bit of fighting with him because he's got the stats for it if you throw some items on him. He can also take 3 misc items, which is unusual and very welcome in a non-magical thug like that. All of the national spells available to Nuln are the same as are available to Altdorf. So again, you can summon up all of your Wizard Lords. Check out the Altdorf video for a breakdown of those. So the only thing I have left to show is the Pretender selection, and then we'll talk a bit about the scales. So Pretender selection, in the previous Altdorf video, I said that they had kind of a restricted Pretender selection. I've actually, for the next version, increased that, so they've got more things available, and it's quite similar to this. You can see that Nuln has quite a bit more available. You've got a lot of humanoid titans, you've got some Dominion 1 guys, you've got a variety of suitable beasties in Dominion 2, and then you've got a few different immobiles you can pick from. So not a bad little Pretender selection, but as always, I'm not really talking about this is like a suggestion of which pretender to pick or bless or anything like that. This is just an overview. If we were taking ideal scales with this nation, what should we go for? Well, I would say that you would definitely want to take high production. That supports you making steam tanks, Ironsides, making heavy cavalry when you need to, making war wagons. This all takes lots of production. I would say take high order because that allows you to make lots of marksmen using the recruitment points, and in general I think you'll kind of be wanting to lean into scales with this nation. Maybe you would say decide the same thing with growth. When taking order, I would typically take a little bit of misfortune, but if you want to get those multi-heroes, you have a higher chance of getting more of those multi-heroes. I guess you could take luck. I don't think this is similar to Altdorf that you necessarily need to take magic because you've got strong researchers available to you in the form of the Celestial Mages, and Amethyst Mages for Nuln are quite cheap for their resource cost. I think they're fairly efficient researchers, although they're not sacred, so over time they cost quite a bit of upkeep. So that's pretty much what I would recommend. Focus on productivity, focus on decent scales. Now, a word of caution, as with Altdorf, the nation has been seen as not having a very good early game historically in games, and a lot of the time it's been killed off fairly early it's been attacked by multiple people in early wars. So you may wish to take an Awake Expander God to help you get a strong expansion and to keep yourself going, but you do have a lot of the tools that I think you need to defend yourself. Like all humanoid nations with not massively high hit points, it's got weaknesses to things like foul vapors, but of course you've got access to that massive magical diversity. So if we had to sum up the strengths and weaknesses of the nation, I would say, as with Altdorf, excellent magical diversity. Not quite as good as Altdorf's magical diversity because you've got some of your mages which are slower to recruit, and because your labs are more expensive. However, you can get to 3 command point fortifications using Mason. So if you've got the money to invest in those, you can get it so you're pointing out 1.5 wizards per turn instead of 1. So that can make up for the extra cost of the labs. You obviously still do actually have access to all of the same diversity that Altdorf. You've got all of the same wizards that they can get, so you do have fantastic magical diversity. You do still have all of those wizard lords, and they cost the same as they cost for Altdorf. So you've got that fantastic mid and late game from summoning up wizard lords. And then I think that you've got units which are more niche targeted. So you've got missile units that have very specific things they want to be attacking, very specific uses. The same with heavy cavalry, and you've got a few more things that the enemy has to worry about countering in the form of the war wagon and the steam tank. You have a bit less Dominion control than Altdorf does. You don't have the Dominion spreaders or anything like that, but you've still got Holy Threes, which is definitely a strength of the nation. Weaknesses, very similar to Altdorf's weaknesses. You potentially are going to have trouble in the early game. Your people in general don't have particularly high hit points. You're vulnerable to things like foul vapors, earthquakes, and so on, remote spells attacking your big armies. And even more so than Altdorf, you really don't have good sacreds. So don't go in there going for a bless. And you do have to worry about the fact that the enemy could have like a really high bless on some really strong sacreds, and you are going to struggle with that. But you do have high damage output units, and you do have lots of armor piercing weapons. If you make the most of those missile weapons, you can kill almost anything that relies on just protection. You can just kill them dead. The things that you might struggle with are things that have very high hit points, good protection, and like regen, things like that, like the ogre sacreds, things like that. They could definitely cause you some trouble. They're harder to, you can hurt them with your missile weapons, but it's harder to just make them dead with your missile weapons. Just delete squares of them. But against things with high protection, you do have lots of options. And of course, you have your 2 tramplers that can just squish things if you need to. That's everything I have to say about Nuln. Obviously, a lot of it's covered in the Altdorf video. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Give them a try. I'll put a link to the mod where you can download it. Obviously, the new version will be up in a couple of days. I will put a link to the Discord. Come and discuss things with me in the Discord. I always love to hear from you. And I'll put a link to my Ko-Fi if you want to support me in carrying on my work. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time, which will probably be the Middenheim video.